Hello and welcome to Drummers Review. I'm Nolly, and today what I'm going to be doing is showing you our process of tuning snare drums for review. This isn't going to be an exhaustive tutorial on how to tune from scratch. Rather, we're just going to focus on a few key techniques that we use to be able to maintain consistency and to hit certain tuning sweet spots to show off every drum in its best light. Today our test drum is a Mapex Black Panther Wraith, and we're going to show you first how we tune the resonant side of the drum before putting a single ply Remo Ambassador coated on the batter side and showing you various sound examples of the few tuning ranges that we use. This head's already been tuned up to more or less how we would tune a resonant head for a review. And what we do here is we actually use a pitch pipe app on a phone in order to record the specific pitches that we like the certain diameter of drums to sound in, so that we know the various tuning ranges that, say, a 14-inch snare drum might have. So on a 14-inch drum, I find that having the resonant head tuned at around an A, so this is quite a high pitch, and that's fairly standard. A lot of people do like to crank the resonant side on their drum. So just to demonstrate, if you can remember that pitch, we've got. It's quite difficult to hear. It's quite dry at this point. I mean, we've also got the wires slightly deadening the head, but essentially what we do is we use the pitch pipe app in order to stabilize the head at that tuning, sometimes even using the aid of a drum dial or tension watch to make sure it's perfectly even so that the snare wires don't buzz strangely. Flipping the drum back over again, I'm going to start to install the Ambassador head that we're going to put on there. So we've got a fresh Remo Ambassador here. Upon getting all the tension rods perfectly lined up, I'm going to go ahead and start to apply tension to this drum. I prefer not to actually use fingers for this. I don't particularly like getting greasy hands, but I do like tuning keys such as this one that have a knurled part at the top that you can twist with your finger. Okay, so all of the screws are more or less down. I'm just going to go over and give it a tiny tighten on each one, still just using the grip at the top. Going around doing this in a star pattern. So we can start to hear that the head's actually taking on a bit of a pitch here. One of the things that's really important to me when I'm tuning any kind of drum is to try and get the head completely stabilized at the lowest pitch possible, because it's way more difficult to track down a particularly loose lug or any inconsistency in the tuning once it's under a lot of tension. So straight away what I'm going to try and do now is get a completely even pitch out of this head. So the key technique that I'm using here is I'm slightly detuning the key and then tuning it back up again. I like to do that to hunt for the pitch instead of just continually putting more and more tension onto each lug, because you end up just raising the pitch way too high and then it's very difficult to find the right tuning sweet spot. So we're really starting to get somewhere here. The predominant pitch that I'm hearing is that kind of pitch that's coming out. A couple of these lugs are not directly on there, but we're going to get there with just a few more turns, and then we'll be able to lift the head up to its actual playing pitch. So there we are, this head's beginning to sound really even in its pitch. It is tuned very low though, so it's not going to sound like a really clear and straight pitch at this point. As we tune it up, we're going to start to get a much better sound out of this head. So right now we are tuned to, let's see what we're close to. We're tuned to an E right now. This is way below what you'd normally tune a snare drum to. To bring a single ply head like this up into what I'd consider to be a low tuning, we want to be aiming for something more like a C, which would sound like, but this is going to be in the whole octave above the E that this is currently tuned to. So I'm going to go and put about half a turn onto all of these lugs and then see where we're at. So where are we at now? So we've reached about an A sharp here, a B flat, so still a little way to go. At this point it can get a little bit more difficult to discern the pitch, because as we start to put more tension on the head, we get loads more overtones too. So you can probably hear there's a few different tones there. You've got to try and keep your ear really focused on that fundamental tone, which now is pretty much bang on a C. If anything, it's actually a little bit sharp, kind of more like a C sharp. Somewhere in between. I'm now going to actually try and get it exactly at a C in pitch. So we've done a pretty good job of getting this drum up into a C pitch. So this is going to be a low tuning example. And what we're going to do now is turn it over to Nick. He's going to give us a little playing demo to show you how this drum sounds in C. So something I didn't do before I let Nick play the drum was to stretch the head in. And what will definitely happen if you don't do that is the pitch of the drum is going to lower quite a lot. So let's take a listen. Nick only played it for a few seconds, but I think we're going to find it's a little bit lower than a C. So here's our C. So we've lost pretty much a semitone there. There's loads of different ways that you can stretch in a head, whether it's putting loads of force in the middle or stretching around the edge. Lots of people have their own ways of doing things. I tend to prefer to do as little as possible in terms of applying loads of force to the head and just let it be played in. And for this demonstration, I think we're just going to roll with not stretching it at all. So if C was our low tuning, D would probably be what I'd call a mid tuning. D, D sharp, that kind of range for me is classic mid tuning for a snare and with a single ply head on it. So we're going to aim for D, which is same as before. I'm going to tune it up about a quarter tone on each lug and see where we go. Still a tiny bit flat. You'll notice I'll do a star pattern when I'm kind of applying a fairly large change to the head. But once I'm fine-tuning, I don't really bother to stick to the star pattern. I know some drummers are very particular about that, but I just tend to go wherever my fancy takes me and see if I can level things out. So we're doing pretty well there. I'd say that's a pretty solid D. So one of the real benefits of having leveled this head out completely at the low pitch is it's now very easy to move the general pitch of the batter head up and down without having to worry about doing too much fine tuning. So this is why it's so worthwhile to get that done early on. Anyway, as before, I'm now going to hand this drum over to Nick, who's going to give us a little demonstration of how it sounds in a D tuning. So as before, let's just take a listen and see if this head slipped at all with Nick playing it, even though it was just for a few seconds. When we're doing reviews and whenever I'm recording drums, maintaining tuning is such a huge and important thing because drum heads do just slip. And if you're not careful, you'll find that by the end of one section, the drum sounds way, way lower than it was at the beginning. This is one of the reasons why having the pitch pipe is so useful, because you can so quickly get back to where you were before. So I'll just take a little listen to that D again. This time it's maintained its tuning really well, so we're ready to move on to a high tuning. Now, a high tuning could be an E. If we take this up another whole step, that would be kind of high. You'd start to get the kind of poppy front end. But you could also take this up a lot higher, especially given that it is quite a thin single ply head, as we've mentioned, into what I'd call cranked territory. So I'm actually going to push it way higher this time. I'm going to take it up to an F sharp, perhaps. At about an F, we've still got another half tone to go, perhaps. So we're at a pretty good F here. I'm just going to go and completely even out the head. I'd say that's us doing pretty well here at a cranked F sharp level. Just how high you can push a drum head is going to really be dependent on how thick it is. So with this 10 mil thick single ply head like a G1 or an Ambassador, you can take them up really high and they're not going to be overly tight. But if you were to use, say, the stock head that comes on this drum, an Evans heavyweight, you'd find that around here it was starting to really feel like a tabletop. But on the plus side, you could probably tune it a little bit lower and it would still have a bit more tension to it. So it's also going to have something to do with how many lugs you have. If you've got more lugs, you're going to be able to crank it down more without it getting choked. So there's a few different factors at play. And when we're doing the reviews, we also take into account the general use that a drum might have, and perhaps how deep it is too. If it's a particularly deep drum, we like to show off its low range a bit. And if it's a particularly shallow drum, it's nice to be able to show a real cranked high pitch. So as before, let's get Nick to give us a little playing demonstration of this drum tuned to F sharp. So all of the different pitches that I've been naming here during this demonstration have been in reference to a 14-inch drum with a single ply head. Now, the head, as I mentioned, does make a difference, but of course, if you were to move down to, say, a 13-inch diameter drum or even a 12, what I say is you can generally add one tone up on the range and one less tone on the low range per inch in diameter you decrease it. So a 13-inch drum could probably go from about a D all the way up to a G sharp should you want it for a real cranked sound, with the sweet spot being around about an E for a mid-range tuning. And a 12, you just add another tone onto that again. We really hope this video has been informative and might even inspire a bit of creativity with your own tuning, make you feel a little bit less constricted and able to experiment with different tuning ranges on your own snares. There's been a load of information here, so we're going to put together some information to put on our website, drummersreview.com, in order that you've got something to refer to and maybe even print out so you've got it to hand. We're going to be continuing this series with how to tune toms, so make sure you subscribe to get more content from us, and I'll see you next time at Drummers Review.